Daily is daily Vikings entertainment. You just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die.
I will ride with this group.
Seriously, man. Please.
And away we go.
All right, Purple Daily on Draft every Monday right here on the Purple Daily YouTube channel podcast feed. Just Tyler Fornes and myself today on this episode of Purple Daily on Draft. Miles taking some time off, so just me and Forno here for as Forno dubbed it in a text message to me last night, a sicko mode 2025 mock draft and draft prospect updates, to be honest. What players could the Vikings be in line with to draft at next year's draft? We may as well take the name of this show, use one of those talking points here in early July. So super excited to get into a bunch of different prospects that Forno I know has some notes on. So hit the like button, subscribe button on Purple Daily on Draft. By the way, go support our friends at the Meadows at Mystic Lake. You can go check them out. They're a great place to book that next tee time. You can do so by going to golfthemeadows.com to learn more. If you haven't booked a tee time quite yet and you've been looking to do that, you can do so by going to golfthemeadows.com. It's a great place to golf, one of the finest places around. So go book that tee time. Tell them Purple Daily sent you, of course, to go book that tee time at golfthemeadows.com. All right, Forno. So I don't think we talked about, I did this with Judd on Purple Daily a few days ago before the holiday weekend, because I saw that in the first Matt Miller mock from ESPN, he had the Vikings drafting Mason Graham, a defensive tackle out of Michigan. Now, he was also on the list that you texted me to. The Vikings will be picking 7th in this mock draft. I think he's kind of just most likely going off over-unders and just kind of sliding those in. I don't know what the exact science he used for his draft order. But number one, do you think the Vikings will be picking as high as 7th in next year's draft? Do you think that's a realistic spot for them?
So the way that ESPN framed that mock draft is they use their own FPI. And FPI is their own football power index, which we can have a conversation whether it's good or not. But they have the Vikings as the 7th worst team right now. So that's before you get all the variables when it comes to the actual football season. It's just projections. So I think it's a little unfair. I'd have them a lot closer to the middle of the pack. I think they're around the 16th, 18th best team in the NFL. People forget that this team played really well with a backup quarterback, and Sam Darnold is better than any of the quarterbacks that the Vikings had on the roster last year post Kirk Cousins injury. So I think that they're going to be a better football team. I also think you got a lot of youth that grew last year because they were put in positions that maybe they shouldn't have been. And that's a benefit for you long term. But 7th, probably a little high. But you get a guy like Mason Graham who, like, Michigan finds athletic freaks on the defensive line. And then they find a way to bring the best out of him. He is a classic 3-tech, very explosive. And one of the things that I like to look for when it comes to defensive linemen is how quick are you off the ball? And what are you asked to do? Because sometimes defensive linemen aren't asked to really be big penetrators. They're asked to hold position. And you see that a lot more in 3-4 defenses than you see in 4-3s, because with 3-4, you only have 3 defensive linemen. A lot of times they're trying to absorb 2 blockers. So then you have your 2 inside linebackers, which for the Vikings be Blake Cashman and Ivan Pace Jr., be able to shoot the gaps and make plays in the running game. That's the idea. While Mason Graham's in a 4-3, they asked him to do a lot of different things. And he's mainly playing that 3 technique. So if you look at things from, if you're on the defense side and you're looking forward, if you're lined up directly over the center, face to face, that's a 0 technique. A shade 3 technique is you look at the guard and then your inside shoulder lines up with their outside shoulder. That's the 3 technique position. 4-eye is your outside shoulders with the tackle's inside shoulder. So that kind of paints a little bit of a picture of kind of where positions are. The Vikings will have 3 techniques on most passing downs. On rushing downs, base downs, you're going to see more of that 4-eye or 5 technique, which is face-to-face with the tackle. Graham is a prototypical, like, kind of 4-3-3 technique, but he can do a little bit more. And I see a lot of really good core strength. He doesn't get moved easily. And I think that's really important here, Declan, when you're talking about this Minnesota Vikings defense, when you only have a couple defensive linemen, you have to be able to hold your position. And he doesn't get moved. He's got good leverage, and he's got what we call sand in the pants. where he does not get moved off of his spot and he can get pushed back. And like when defensive line pushed back, it's almost like their back arches a little bit, but they don't move their feet. Their feet stay solid on the ground. He does that really well, especially the game against Ohio State. They had a really difficult time moving him. And he can also shed blocks in the running game, which is really, really pivotal in that 3-4. Got to be able to shed those blocks and be able to get some of those tackles. And the one thing that I found really interesting, something that the Vikings, I think, will be able to utilize a lot with whoever ends up playing defensive line for them down the line, stunts. When you have stunts, you have one guy crash inside, one guy loop around. Pretty simple concept, and it can create a lot of confusion with blocking schemes. They trusted Mason Graham to be the looper, the guy who runs around. You don't trust the guy to be the looper that if they're not athletic. And we've seen guys like Mozzie Smith, Aiden Hutchinson, Kwity Paye over the last few years, just absolute bonkers athletes on the defensive line. Mason Graham is the next guy. And if he can fully put it all together this year and take a big step, you could talk about him as a top 3 pick. I think right now, around that 7 to 12 range is probably about right as far as projections. We also have to remember that Jaquelin Roy was a projected first-round pick in the summer of 2022. He went in the 5th round in 2023. So these aren't perfect. It's a good baseline for where things sit right now and a good way to kind of look forward. Okay, these are the players I need to watch and keep an eye on because it makes sense that they might be available for one of my team picks.
So with Graham too, because the Vikings have definitely some holes trying to stop the run. They've been looking for a good defensive tackle or even nose tackle that can plug up run holes and just not be pushed around, to your points earlier. Does Graham strike you as a guy that can be good against the run, or is this more of the explosive nature of a guy that could be a freak getting after the quarterback? And there could be a combination of both, I'm sure. But do you think Graham is someone too that could maybe be a good candidate to also stop the run and try to plug the hole that the Vikings have been really bad at over the last 3 to 4 years?
He's not a nose tackle, but he's not incapable of stopping the run. He actually does a relatively good job. It looks like he's got some pretty good length, which is really nice to have for an interior defensive lineman. It's not as big of a necessity as it is with edge rushers because tackles have significantly longer arms than guards, because with guards, you need to win the leverage battle more than you need to win the speed battle. And by having long arms on the outside, you can keep guys outside of your frame. By keeping outside of your frame, it's a lot easier to block them. So Graham has that ability to be able to like shed blocks and disengage and make plays in the running game, but he's not going to be a traditional nose tackle. But stopping the run he's not a one-trick pony. I did find this interesting, Declan, doing some research this morning. The Vikings had the 8th best rush defense in the NFL last year with that defensive line. I know, 98.7 yards per game, 8th best rush defense. So
interesting.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued to see how Brian Flores concocts things this year. And when you have better linebackers, that's theoretically should be better. The defensive line isn't significantly worse than what it was last year.
True.
You did lose a little bit, but we're not talking like you lost your best player in Harrison Phillips. It's like if Jerry Tillery's fine, that's an upgrade. Like, we're not even talking good. We're just talking average. If you get average out of Bullard and Tillery and good out of Harrison Phillips, look, it's not great. It's not sexy. You want better, but it's more than capable. And
absolutely,
adding a guy like Mason Graham next year, and we'll have a longer talk today and in the future about if it's smart to draft a young defensive lineman and expect them to play right away with how this team is being built versus spending in free agency, because I think that's a really good discussion. But Graham fits the bill.
So what other prospects are we looking at here for now that could be around maybe that 7 to 12 range? Because I agree. I think that's probably more likely. Maybe they surprise and they are maybe in the later teens. But what other prospects are you kind of wanting to really focus on this summer and then obviously into the college football season to watch as their stock either rises, falls, or just develops overall?
So one of the interesting things about the NFL draft, and we've had this conversation many times, you want to draft talent. You don't want to draft for need, because if you draft for need, you can miss out on potentially generational talent. Like, if J.J. Watt was available and the Vikings took Christian Ponder, we never would have heard the end of it. Because J.J. Watt is arguably like a top 5 defensive lineman that's ever played football. Like, you can make that argument. He had, back-to-back years, I think, of 20 sacks. He was just insane during that peak run with the Texans. But he went 1 pick before Ponder. So thankfully, we don't have to have that conversation every single year. But it shows you that if he was available and they would have taken Watt instead of a quarterback, like, that's the process you want to go in when you have these conversations with the draft. So I took a look at 5 players, 2 defensive linemen, a cornerback / wide receiver, which we'll talk about next, and then 2 other wide receivers, because I think the Vikings are going to do 2 things, and Alec Lewis of The Athletic even talked about it. They're going to prioritize defensive line and cornerback in free agency, and I'm not convinced that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah prioritizes corner as a premium position. Not in the way he prioritizes wide receiver, offensive line, edge rusher, offensive tackle specifically, not offensive line, because he is moneyball and guard, which I completely agree with. It's cornerback is more of a sum of its parts position, don't have a weakness. And when they lost Byron Murphy Jr. last year, they started to have a real weakness, and they got taken advantage of in those last 4 games. Because remember, the game against the Bengals, the 4th to last game, he tore his MCL on the 3rd play of the game, and he played the rest of the game. But they ended up allowing 30 points on average over the last 4. That made a really big difference. So I think he believes it is a sum of its parts position, which completely fine with. And that would kind of leave out, hey, we're going to prioritize a top flight corner. But the interesting thing about Travis Hunter, Colorado, he's being talked about guys like Deion Sanders, who's his college head coach, Champ Bailey, Chris Gamble. All those guys played both ways. Now, people talked heavily before the 1998 NFL draft that Champ Bailey should play receiver and that he should go and be a receiver full time. Well, he ended up playing cornerback his entire career. And if he's not in the Hall of Fame yet, he's going to be. I can't remember when he retired. But he is one of my top 5 best cornerbacks that's ever played. He's incredible. 6'2" and long arms, athletic. The Broncos traded Clinton Portis for Champ Bailey and a 2nd round pick in the mid 2000s. That's wild.
Yeah, he is in the Hall of Fame, by the way. He got in 2019, it looks like. He did get in.
Good, then he was a first ballot, because Champ Bailey was incredible.
He was awesome. Hell yeah.
But Travis Hunter's kind of viewed in the same way. He was an Iron Man last year, over 1,000 snaps last year, Declan, and he missed 3 games. He had, I think, 6 or 7 games where he had over 100 snaps played, and he played incredibly well on both sides of the football. Now, one of the reasons why you talk about him as a wide receiver over a cornerback is cornerbacks, if you have an elite one like a Joel Rivas, it's great. But the thing with corner is you can lose it really fast, and Vikings fans saw that with Xavier Rhodes. He had that all-pro season in 2017, had a little bit of a regression year in 2018, which is fine. Going from all-pro to just being good, all right. Then in 2019, he cratered. Cornerback is cyclical like that. So that's why it leads me to believe that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah doesn't necessarily prioritize the position, which in itself is a fascinating one. And Hunter, the idea is that wide receiver is so much more valuable than corner, and Hunter's a really good wide receiver. He creates separation with ease running routes. He understands how to beat cornerbacks because he's arguably the best cornerback in college football. He knows how to beat himself, and he can manipulate corners. He can run really crisp routes, has really good hands. Shockingly great considering his size. I believe he's 6'1", 188. In contested catch situations, he caught 7 of 11 balls. And that in itself isn't necessarily a predictable metric, but what you want to look at is you want to look at how they're making those catches. And that's where my real concern is. I don't see him attacking the football. And that's a big, big factor when you talk about NFL receivers. If the ball's coming to you, you better go get it. Like on comeback routes, you can't just stand pat. Somebody's going to come from behind it and either get the ball or knock it down. You have to attack the football. And he just has not shown enough of that at the college level. I watched all the contested catches last night. Maybe one of them, he went and straight up attacked the football versus letting it come to him. I worry about that passive nature of wanting to go get the football. Because on corner, it's a completely different story. He's attack, attack, attack. So as a wide receiver, I'm a little worried about that. But you talk about corner, the only really big concern that you have is he just does not seem to have the long speed. If he's going against a Tyreek Hill and he'll get to step on him on a 9 route, a go route, it's probably over. And that's your only real concern because he knows how to utilize technique. He knows how to stay in front of you. He knows how to get his hands in your face and be able to mirror. All those things are great. And if you really want to take a top flight corner, Hunter's a great one. Plus, you have Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame and Will Johnson from Michigan, who are great players to kind of keep an eye on as well if corner ends up being the priority. But Hunter, I think, could be a really special wide receiver. And I think there's a lot of merit to having him stay at that position versus playing cornerback in the NFL.
So on cornerbacks with the cliff that falls off there, because we talk about that with running backs a lot, and a lot of that obviously comes with workload and touches, et cetera. Is that a similar problem with cornerbacks? Is cornerback just where eventually, like, you get to year 4 or 5, just like Xavier Rhodes in the NFL, and the other speed, the opposition starts catching up to you? What do you think is maybe like one of those core reasons why there is a huge cliff and why there's a big decline in cornerbacks that go from Xavier Rhodes being an all-pro to basically being off the team 2 years later?
My theory, and I haven't been able to speak to a lot of like players on this because I'd be very interested. I think it's mental. I think it's something that, each teams have sports psychologists and players will talk to them because so much of it is mental. And look, cornerback is like offensive line. You're going to lose. And you're going to lose a lot. And sometimes you can like mentally just get down. Like Declan, you've been covering the Twins. It's kind of like a baseball slump. And sometimes you just can't get out of that, even though you still have the ability. I think those things matter. And plus, it is very difficult to play corner, especially against all the talented wide receivers in the National Football League. Like, we're talking about another really good wide receiver class that could end up being a great one. There's 2 guys that we're going to talk about later. I have 2 wide receivers on this list because of the idea of drafting talent versus need. And it's just such a difficult position to play. And it's not just difficult physically. It's incredibly difficult mentally. And it takes a very, very strong person mentally to be able to handle that kind of failure because you're going to fail. It is inevitable that you will fail multiple times per game playing cornerback. How do you handle that? How do you process that? Do you let that continue to build up? Do you let that impact you long term? And seeing a sports psychologist, having those conversations can really help you stay focused and not let it build up to be too much. Like, I don't know for sure that that's 100% the reason why. That's my hypothesis. Because it's such a tough position and
Totally.
You got to shake off the last play. And coaches have said that for years upon years. It's not always that easy, Declan. Like I remember when I played sports, it's you make a mistake. I remember one time I begged my coach to play second base or like infield. He let me play second base. In one inning, I had 3 errors. 2 ground balls got past me and I missed a catch on a stolen base. Coach looked at me and said, "You are never playing infield again." And I was 11, but he was right. I stunk. Right. And like mentally, first one, I got freaked out after the next 2. Like, and an 11-year-old is not the same as an NFL player, but human nature can be. And that's why these conversations are so important to understand. And that's why I believe my hypothesis could be correct.
So who are the other wide receivers that are maybe on this list, or who are the other players that we haven't touched on yet that the Vikings could be in line to draft at this year's draft?
Oh boy, strap in, Declan. These 2 are studs and they're different. And that's what I think makes this conversation so fun at the top of this class. They're going to be wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. Tetairoa McMillian of Arizona, Luther Burden III out of Missouri. Let's start with Burden. Okay. He is, if you wanted a Deebo Samuel type player who is a little bit smaller, compact, incredibly versatile, and great after the catch, that archetype of receiver, that's what Burden is. He was a 5-star recruit out of the state of Missouri, stayed home, which was an incredible get for Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, who going into last year was on the hot seat, and they really found a way to put it together. But Burden has everything that you want from that perspective. He is someone, if you give him to Andy Reid, watch out, because Reid is going to be able to dial up plays, or like a Kyle Shanahan. Just get him the ball with a little bit of space and a little bit of runway and let him do things. Now, he can do things like a classic wide receiver as well. He can go deep. He can attack the ball at the catch point, but he's so special with the ball in his hands and being able to run after the catch that it's just going to be incredibly enticing for teams. And when you look at how his fit would be with the Minnesota Vikings, Justin Jefferson is an incredible route runner, and he's good with getting yards after the catch. He's not great at it. Same with Jordan Addison. Neither one of them are really yards after catch kind of guys. So you bring in a guy like Burden, who would be able to be that yards after catch guy, be able to take those 5-yard drag routes and be able to take it for 20 yards. And then you'd be able to allow Addison and Jefferson to do like clear out stuff and to be able to maximize what they're doing, because eventually you get a couple really nice runs on those shallow routes for Burden. That's going to open up stuff for Jefferson Addison, because, I need to focus on this guy because he's killing us. And that's where having another really good pass catcher can help a guy like JJ McCarthy. And complementing, I was a little concerned about Addison being too similar stylistically to Justin Jefferson, where I'm like, okay, do you want to have two of the same guy when, like, I really loved Quentin Johnson in that class because he was a great yards after catch guy. He had a little bit of size, and I thought the contested catch skills were better than what people were portraying them. Now, he struggled, and it looks like the Vikings made the right choice. Well, they didn't even have a choice to get Johnson. They took Addison, the fourth of that group. But I think it's worked out really well, and I was proven that my initial worries were incorrect, because he's just been so good. And it looks like he's going to be even better this year. So, but having versatile skill sets, I think, is really important to the wide receiver group, because it allows you to do different things. And while Addison, Jefferson can get yards after the catch, it's not their forte.
So what would you prioritize as like the top 3 needs as of this moment? And the season will play out. To your point, there might be some positions that they go in free agency with that change those draft needs in the big boards. Is defensive tackle number 1 on the list for you? And then or defensive line, I really should say, is number 1 on that list. What would be 2 and 3 in terms of the draft needs for the Vikings next year?
I think defensive line is 1, and I think it's 1 with a bullet.
Yeah.
I don't know how to view cornerback, because we just don't know so much about the players in the room. And this would have been the same conversation before the tragic passing of Kyrie Jackson. There's just so many question marks that you have to answer with the players in your room before we can really determine how big of a need this is going to be in the future. How are they going to take that next step? Booth Jr. and Evans are third-year players. This is theoretically the year for them to take that big step. Kai Blackman's going into his 2nd year. Byron Murphy Jr. might be going into his 6th, but he's 26 years old. You have Dwight McGlothern, who looks like he could be a capable player as a UDFA. Mm-hmm. So I'm very hesitant on saying corner's a major need. I want more information, because there's just so many question marks about what that position is going to be, because we have so many question marks about each individual in that room. There's nothing really consistent. And so I'm kind of keeping that group to the side. It could be 1, it could be 5. I really don't know. So I'll ignore that for now. Second to me is probably going to be running back. I do like Ty Chandler. I do like Aaron Jones, but when it comes to needs and when you're entering the NFL draft, you got to look at players who are coming out in the class. This running back class, Declan, is loaded. You're talking multiple players who could go in round 1, talking like 8 guys who could potentially go top 50. This running back class is incredibly deep. Ohio State's got 2 guys who could like be going in the top 40. Quinshad Judkins, who transferred from Mississippi, and Travion Henderson. You're looking at players who could make a really big difference. Yeah, I know, Odie, you like running backs. You're a good boy. So getting a running back in, like, who knows what the Vikings will end up picking? We don't know because they have a first, theoretically compensatory third, and 2/5.
Yep.
The Vikings will probably end up getting another day 2 pick at some point with a trade or a trade down if in the first round, especially if they end up picking top 10. Trading down to pick up a pick or two feels like the smart play. But this running back class is incredibly deep. You could get a starter in round 3 because it's just really, really good. I'm not 100% sure if the Vikings will prioritize it the same way. And it's all going to depend on Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler. If Jones is great, they'll probably keep him. If Ty Chandler takes that next step like everybody's talking about, then it might not be an issue. But Jones is 29, and he's not going to be around forever. And with this kind of running back class, I would really consider trying to take one relatively high because having a great running back for your quarterback is a good thing. And that's kind of the way I look at it. Third is wide receiver. I don't trust anybody after the top 2 guys. And we talked about Burden. The other guy I wanted to talk about is Tetairoa and McMillian from Arizona. Think about this, Declan. Think about DeAndre Hopkins at 6'5" with speed. Because Hopkins isn't a very fast player.
Right.
McMillian he's 6'5", 210. He looks a little bit skinny. He's just incredibly smooth in everything he does. He catches balls outside of his frame. He goes up and attacks the football and contested catches, has great hands, runs really good routes, and can get yards after the catch. And with him and Burden, it's a stylistic thing. Which guy do you want? Do you want the strictly yards after catch guy? Or do you want the guy who is a tower, who can do a little bit of everything? And adding one of those players to this offense with the theoretically what you're going to get from JJ McCarthy in the future, Declan, how enticing is that? How enticing is having 4 potentially great weapons on the outside? Sure, you're going to have to figure out how to pay him. Guess what? That's future Kwesi's problem. You're going to have Addison on a rookie contract for at least 2 or 3 more years once you draft a wide receiver, if you drafted one of McMillian or Burden. And then they're going to be on a rookie contract for 4 years. And that's better than paying a wide receiver 3, like, I don't know, $5 to $10 million because you just haven't been able to fill the position internally, which I don't know if they're going to be able to do. And that's where drafting talent versus drafting need is going to be such a pivotal conversation for us moving forward, Declan. I'm really intrigued to see how that's going to manifest itself.
Yeah, I mean, to me, in terms of the draft needs, I think your positions there are dead on. I would be, and we've talked about this with Miles too, I would be pretty surprised if there's not a trade back in the first round for the Vikings just to accumulate more picks. And, you know, I know the last time they went from 12 to 32 in this Kwesi's first draft. You know, I don't know if it'll get that aggressive. At the end of the day, I do think the Vikings accumulate another day 2 pick. So that probably does mean, you know, going down at least 5 to 10 spots in the draft, wherever they are picking. Yeah. I would put, you know, I don't think I can bet on this. I'm going to Vegas next week for my mini moon. I'm very excited. I don't think I can put a bet on this, but if I can find the sports book that can do it, I will take the money line right now on a trade back for the Vikings in the first round, because I do think that is very likely to happen by next year's draft.
I agree completely. And this draft, luckily, like if we're talking about need, which I actually think the Vikings are going to address their needs at defensive line and potentially cornerback in free agency, because free agency is for fixing needs, draft is for acquiring talent. And if you fix theoretically defensive line and cornerback, which everybody's going to talk about as the top 2 needs, you can then go into the draft feeling pretty good. Hey, I love this player. We don't necessarily need him, but he's really, really good. Awesome. Take him. That sounds great. And then that's how you end up with a 3 deep situation. And I know we keep referencing 3 deep, and I'm sure it's annoying, but I would love to have 3 wide receivers. One guy I want to bring up to you, Declan, that's fascinating. He was the 5th guy on my list. Deon Walker from Kentucky. Do you know anything about Deon Walker?
I do not. Educate me.
He's 6'6", 340 pounds,
6'6",
and plays edge rusher a lot.
Big old boy.
He is built thick. Yeah, he's not built fat. He looks like he's kind of built in a lab. there's a play on my Twitter. Go check it out at The Real Forno. There's a play where Walker at 6'6", 340 drops into coverage and forces an interception. Imagine coming across the middle and that guy's charging at you.
Yeah.
Like he's kind of freaky. He's got really good hand movement. He's got an excellent quickness. He kind of moves like Vita Vea, where Vita Vea, weighing about the same, just moves way faster than anybody his size should. And he's got great hand movement. Now, one thing he has to figure out is leverage, because he's 6'6", and being 6'6" on the interior, when he does play on the inside, you get stood up a lot. I'm 6'6", Declan. You could get your hands underneath my armpits and push me up and stand me up, because you have the leverage battle. He's going to be out leveraged theoretically by pretty much every offensive lineman he plays on the interior, and probably a decent amount of tackles. So that could be a problem for him long term. He's got to learn to really keep that pad level low so he doesn't get out leveraged that easily. But you're talking about a guy with freaky movement skills at 340 pounds, and it's a healthy 340. It's not Tony Siragusa. I have a belly the size of Phil Mackey 340. It's a good proportional person. And like, this draft is going to be so much fun to keep an eye on this year. But those 5 guys that we talked about, Declan, 5 guys that I want Vikings fans to watch, because I think one of them could end up being a Minnesota Viking in the future.
I love it. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. This is Purple Daily on Draft every Monday, typically on the Purple Daily YouTube channel and podcast feed. We appreciate everyone watching and subscribing and consuming this show. Appreciate Forno for those sicko modes. Go back, watch the tape. All those names are in our bio. So if you lost track of any of those names, they're right there in the bio here on the YouTube and podcast feed to go learn more. Appreciate everyone listening. This is Purple Daily, where we just want to see the Vikings win a Super Bowl before we die.